Welcome to Educating to be Human, a podcast where we'll explore what it means to be human in today's world at the intersection of education, technology, and culture. I'm your host, Lisa Petrides, founder of the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education. Each week, I'll speak with people who are supporting transformative change in education today. That is, ordinary people creating extraordinary impact. Thank you very much for listening. In this episode of Educating to be Human, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ashanti Branch. He's a former math teacher in Oakland, California, and he's founder of the Ever Forward Club. Now, Ashanti's classroom experience led him to see how the bright young men he taught were not thriving, and he took it upon himself to better understand how the challenges in their personal lives kept them from making school a priority. So as founder of the Million Mask Movement, Ashanti leads a powerful initiative aimed at helping young men, especially young men of color, to better understand the metaphorical masks they hide behind, so as not to outwardly express their fears and emotions. So through the development of an anonymous mask creation activity, which we'll hear more about later, these young men are given the space and the encouragement to express their full selves. And in doing so, they're able to better understand, share, and support their struggles with others. So in this episode, we talk about Ashanti's journey, the future of the Million Masks Project, and the powerful impact of creating a more authentic and supportive world for our youth and for each other. So let's go behind the mask. Hi, Ashanti. Welcome. I'd love to start today by asking you about what the Ever Forward Club is and a little bit about your start as a teacher.
Yeah, thank you. I was a first-year teacher. I had just left an engineering career. My vision was in life to be rich. And when teaching called me, I ran from it. And so the fact that I find myself, day one in this classroom with these students, scared out of my mind, like what's going to happen next, I was clear that I was there for a reason. I didn't know the only reason at the moment. I didn't know the reason at the moment, but I deeply felt like there's a calling happening on my life. And so I began teaching at San Lorenzo High School, and I saw like really smart young men failing my class. Like I was like, wait a minute, you're smart. I can tell you're smart. I can see it in you. You're maybe trying to hide it from others, but I can tell like in just the context and how quickly you pick up on things. But school wasn't cool to a lot of students who I saw. And I had kind of forgotten what it was like to be a student who wanted to be cooler than I wanted to be smart. And I was like, what's going on here? And it wasn't until I just decided that either I'm leaving teaching because I'm failing. I'm doing a horrible job. If smart kids are failing my class and I think I'm smart, like, why are we creating failure? So the vision was I was going to leave, but I was like trying one last thing. I went back to school to do this profession that I thought was calling me, and I'm doing bad at it. And I think other teachers were like, well, you'll get good at it. Just give it a couple of years. I'm like, wait, you mean I got to be broke and a failure for a couple of years? I mean, I knew I was going to sign up to be broke, but I didn't sign up to be a failure. And that's how it all started. And so I invited some young men to lunch. I said, look, I'll buy you lunch once a week. In exchange for lunch, during those lunch sessions, I want you to teach me how to be a better teacher. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, let's learn about each other, but also I want you to help me figure out how I can make school better for you, because it doesn't make sense that you're not doing well. Now, some of the students in our club, they weren't all failing classes. Some of them just, their social capital was challenged. So they were great academically, but socially they were either in a shell or they were like shot, like or whatever it was. I just saw something amazing in those young men. And so that's how it all started. So that was 2004. This is our 20th year anniversary. I'll fast forward you really far to 2015. We were featured in a documentary called The Mask You Live In. And the reason I'm fast forwarding, there's a lot more in between there, but just to name it, what I didn't know when I started the documentary filmed us was that I was talking about the masks, back in 2004, but I just wasn't using the metaphor of a mask. I knew there was stuff going on with those students that were like showing this thing on the outside, but there was more going on the inside. And I think it took, that first 11 years to kind of like come to a place of being able to explain it in a clean, clear, concise way of what I was seeing. And that's how it all happened.
You came to Big Ideas Fest some years ago and did this amazing session for us on taking off the mask. And I've since experienced it in other venues and know that you've been doing this around the world. And so maybe tell us a little bit more really about the masks and what that is. You just alluded to it, but tell us what it means to take off the mask and a little bit about what you do in that.
Yeah. So what I had been seeing over those 11 years of what I was doing ever before, let's say I saw smart young men not showing how smart they were. Before Ever4 started, I had forgotten that I used to do that in middle school. When I got to high school, I was already on track. So when I'm teaching these students and I'm like, dude, why would you rather have a fight with me or argument with me than just to let me support you? I'm not your enemy. Maybe you have enemies out here. Maybe there's enemies in your community, but I'm not one of them. I want you to be your best. And I think what I saw in them was there's a certain way I have to show up in life. And I think the mask is like, you put on this mask, there's what the character is in that mask. If you've ever been in a theater class, maybe they even practice with masks. They say, hey, take this mask and act like this character. And you get to put on this persona. It's what I want people to see about me. It's what I let people see. And when you think about behind the mask, it's the things I don't let people see. I don't talk about. There's one mask that most people won't be able to see it, but I'm going to have you describe it. So basically a circle with a smiley face. And then there's 4 words on the front of the mask. It says happy, smart, outgoing, and caring. That's what this is from a young man, shows on the front of there. Now, the mask is anonymous. I don't know who it belongs to, but I would never forget it when I first opened it up and I saw it. And on the back of this mask, if you look, there's a bunch of words written, the same word written 18 times, and that word is anger.
Anger, yeah.
Anger. And when I saw this, it not only like stopped me in my tracks, I literally just stared at it for a long time and realized how many of our young men are walking around happy, smart, outgoing, and caring on the outside. Yet what they're not talking about, what they're not showing, is that they're carrying around a load of anger, or replace that word with any other emotion you could think of. And I think that is what I began to see happening in schools. I began to see also what happens in schools is a context of like, if I am in a certain school environment, and let's say I go to the office and I tell somebody in the office, let's say office of people who are there doing their job, they're busy, they're just navigating the day. I come in and say, hey, I'm feeling sad, worried, and stressed. And they're like, well, maybe, just don't worry so much, don't stress so much, don't think so much, and go back to class, right? Because our schools are designed, or they may, like somebody in the office may say, you know what, actually, we have a counselor over here. Now, let's say you go see the counselor. There's another scenario. Oh, do you have insurance? Go have your parents fill out this paperwork so then we can talk. Because now there's the thing that's in the way of this. And maybe I can't tell my parents because my parents don't believe in that. So therefore now I'm stuck.
So they need the permission from their parents to be able to talk to the school counselor.
That's right. The rule that the school has in place. But let's say, because no one in the office is there, let me just have a chat with you, see how you're doing. I mean, if you told me that, if somebody told me that, a friend of mine told me, I'm like, hey, what's on your mind? I would ask that question. But if you're in a school where you got hundreds of kids running around and some kids comes in, if you're not careful, you can go through the rigid process and miss the heart. And let's say that same kid 2 days later punches some kid in PE because he talked about them. He said something to them, did something to them. That kid comes back to the office. Now that kid has done an act that we know what to do with. Schools know what to do with a kid who has physically assaulted another kid because we have a rule book. And it says you hit somebody, there can be this consequence or this consequence or this consequence, up to a suspension for multiple days. Now, the kid who came in 2 days ago telling you they was worried and stressed, we had nothing for them necessarily when that was what it was. But now that I've done something, now we got a consequence. And the consequence is not getting you support about the worry and stress that you were feeling already. It's to just deal with the symptom of what you have now expressed on the outside. And I think that what I saw in Ever Forward with the mask was sometimes our young people don't even know how to ask for help when they're feeling stressed, worried, and sad. We have some work to do around that social emotional development in young people. And so that's why we created the mask activity. It's anonymous, right? It's like, but if we can get a litmus test to say, oh, this is what's happening. There are students at this school who are walking around writing angry 18 times on the back of this idea of a mask. We probably should talk about anger. How do you navigate anger? How do you navigate stress? How do you navigate sadness? When do schools teach those classes? It almost rarely ever happens.
Right. So tell me how this work of taking off the mask was integrated. Was it started actually within the Ever Forward Club? And then how has it evolved over time? This work just seems so phenomenally important to what we're seeing today. And it's hard to believe that every school wouldn't want a program like this.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I saw is that when we did the activity that first time in the documentary, I didn't know it was going to work. I was working with a group of young men at Fremont High School in Oakland who were struggling. And I had tried all of my best activities with them. I had been doing Ever Forward, almost 9 years by that time, 10 years. And I'm like, okay, let's do this activity and that activity and that. And nothing was working with these young men. I mean, they were resistant. Anything that had to do with talking about feelings was a barrier. And I was like, what is going on? Now, I'm the dean that year. So I'm dealing with students when they get kicked out of class. I'm dealing with them when they're cutting class in the hallway. I'm dealing with them when they're caught smoking over there behind the gym. I'm dealing with all the stuff, but they weren't talking about what they were really going through. And what I realized right away was my job as a educator was to learn deeper what was happening. So when they asked us to be a part of this documentary, I said, look, these young men at this club, they don't open up. I began building a club there, but it was not our official program. It was it was a hybrid of what our normal club was. What I began to see when I asked these young men to not talk about it, just to write it. Don't put their name on it, anonymous. When we did that activity in the documentary, when I'm in the room with them, I'm literally waiting for an argument to start, because anytime we ask them about how they feel, somebody's going to start doing something to distract the room, because they had a fear, a barrier, some kind of a built-in rule system that said, don't talk about feelings. And so they resisted. And what I found was that when they took these pieces of paper and they balled them up and they threw them at each other, and when they opened up, they got a new one and they opened it up, it wasn't their paper. It was somebody else's in that room paper. And they realized, oh, wow. When they heard the words of the young men in that room, hearing what's on the front and what's on the back, they were the room dropped into a place I had never seen before. And I think that is the opportunity. And it was a clarity oh, okay. Now, I was in the room when it first happened, but it wasn't almost until, and I started making masks with people on a smaller scale. But when I went to the documentary to see it, The Mask You Live In, and sat in that chair and watched it, that's when I saw it, right? I had been experiencing it, but it was another thing when I'm sitting in that chair and I'm literally I cried in there, because I saw things in the room that I didn't see where I was sitting from my vantage point. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I was clear at that point that this is exactly where we're going next. Giving it a name, a metaphor, giving it a room, anonymous, giving it space to talk about it, and not having to feel like the light is on me, made it so much easier for young men to be able to talk about it, and made it easier for people to be able to say, oh yeah, I get that. Oh man, I experienced that too. And so that's the tagline. There's more to me than you can see. There's more to you than I can see by looking at you. And so when we can hold that context, I think more people need to be aware of that context, but hold that context. I think we can do so much more,
I'd love to hear a little more about this project in action and its impact on the young men you work with.
Yeah, I have seen this concept provide space and room for young men and all students, because now it's a global campaign. Our work originally began with just young men, but what I've seen it do is create space for people to just get clear that it's not just me. Now, that's easy to say. You're not alone, right? There's a tagline, it's a hashtag, it's T-shirts, it's you're not alone, right? It's all the things that you're not alone fits under in the world. But there's a deeper place of really seeing it, feeling it, hearing it, understanding it. And I think what we see in the work with the mask, the first workshop that we did when the movement began to grow, so when I started realizing that this activity was the activity that we were going to put out in the world, we got invited to a conference. One of my team members, a young man who has been a part of our work, We go to this hotel in Burlingame. We're getting ready for the workshop at 7 o'clock in the morning, getting everything ready. Hey, wear the masks. Because in the documentary, I make copies of these masks. So I have made copies of a bunch of these masks. And we get to the hotel, there's no mask. Now, he and I had a longer talk, but I'll just say right now, he had two jobs: markers and masks, markers and masks, and there's no mask. I'm like, how are we going to do a mask workshop with no mask? And so in this moment, I'm like, I'm going down to the copy center. And I don't know if you've ever been to too many hotels, copy centers. Most times they're average at best. This one had no copy machine that was working. They said you can make 2 copies or 5 copies, whatever it was. It was not going to be 80 that I needed. And I'm like, oh my God, there's no Kinko place. There's no print shop nearby. And my brain is like, okay, we got invited to do this workshop. What are we going to do? So that was the first day. I went to the front desk. I said, you have any paper? Can I have some paper? That's how the drawing started. Because originally in the documentary, I printed masks. It was just a random mask online. I just printed it. And then I was like, she said, well, we can't give you any of this paper because we need it for these machines, but I can give you this big paper. I'm like, I'll take whatever you can give me. So she gave me this 11 by 17 paper. I have them still here somewhere. This is 2014, I think it was. I don't remember what year, but 2014 around. She hands me these big 11 by 17 pieces of paper, and I'm like, we got to work with it. And literally, I remember when there's a snowball fight happens after they ball these pieces of paper. These were like snow globes. I said, listen, these are the biggest pieces of paper we ever worked with, so please don't hurt nobody, right? But it was like, that's the first time. And when I went home that night and I opened all these pieces of paper up and I smashed them down, and I was like, this is amazing. And that's when I knew that it wasn't going to be any more of me ever printing masks. It was going to be giving people just permission and the space to draw their own mask. We're at about 80. It's called the Million Mask Movement. We have a long way to go. We're at about 80,000+ right now. And it's been just an amazing journey of watching what gets drawn.
So tell me about the Million Mask Movement. So you have 80,000. We're going to get to 1,000,000. How's that going to happen? And what's going to happen in our communities as we're doing this?
Yeah. Now that I'm starting to see that we're going to start telling the story along the way. So we get this first research paper coming out. We're going to ideally produce 2 more research papers in the summer, really looking at the data that we're learning. This first one is about 2 sophomore classes at 2 different schools, a private school and a public school, and looking at those masks. The next one will probably be about young men. We haven't figured out. The young men are going to help create the topic, like who we're going to look at. And then we're going to do probably one more this summer. So we're going to start telling some of the stories we're learning. We've been sharing masks on social media, but I think even sharing masks, people it's not as compelling as I thought it would be, even though the images are very compelling to me. So we're constantly just testing the water. Like what message needs to be out there? And since most of our work is in education, we're going to start sharing who's struggling in our schools. We know that our young men, our boys are struggling, and not that they're the only ones struggling, but they are struggling. And so we're going to start really kind of like honing in on some of those, middle-aged boys, middle school, high school, and maybe start with a middle school group, 11 to 14, and then 14 and 18, or those groups of like, what are we seeing? What are they telling us? Because they're putting compelling words on those cards. And so that's the next step. I was worried for a long time, like, why is it taking so long to get to 1,000,000? Like, isn't this an amazing idea? That's what people say about their ideas, right? Isn't this an amazing idea? But I realized that, okay, we're going to get there eventually. Right now, let's start telling the stories what we're learning. And I didn't think about that in the beginning because I wasn't creating it with the end in mind. I was creating it for what I was serving right here in the present moment,
Yeah, I think the stories about what you're learning are so important to understand now, because you're really trying to educate people, right? Educators and other young people about how our young people in need and our at-risk students, how they're trying to navigate this world that they're experiencing, right? So you're trying to create this human conversation among people. And it seems like when they're in those groups, that's when they're really having that connection. Maybe it doesn't surprise me as much as it's harder than you thought on social media, although I don't know how much you've done with TikTok or something like that. But certainly just posting a picture of a mask is not the same experience of actually, being in a room and having this human connection and taking your mask and crumpling it in a little ball and then having a snowball fight with them across a room, across a classroom, across a ballroom, whatever it is. So I can see how this next step really has to be about showing the data, telling the stories. What have you learned? How are you going to do that differently now? What are you thinking?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think as we're in this next phase, as we're telling more of the stories, is as we share masks, as we invite young people to be a part of it. So we're building out our young men's core. That's going to be starting this summer. That'll be the first group that will go through this social emotional leadership academy this summer. Their part of their job is going to be, they'll be on 3 or 4 teams. And one of the teams, their job is to figure out, what do we need to do not only to encourage more young people to participate, but what do we need to do to engage the communities in this tool? So we're going to put it in the hands of youth, right? I've been using my old ideas for all this time, and now it's like, okay, we need to get the young people involved. One thing we're really excited about, we had 3 sets of our young men who went with us to South by Southwest for this pop-up that we had. We had our a big booth. It was a beautiful experience. Those young men, their role was to be a part of this Mental Health Action Day, which was last week. 4 of them ignited pop-ups at their school events. Actually, five. And one is still in the process because he's going to do it between now and the end of the year. So it was an opportunity for them to like take it and have the positive experience, or even the challenging experience of, what does it look like for me to go out into the world to then deliver this thing that I know about, I understand it. How do I talk to other young people? And I think through their experience of this, it is going to help them. I mean, at South by Southwest, they were amazing, but they were talking to a lot of adults. I think it's sometimes easier for young people to talk to adults relatively than to talk to their own peers. And so when they can find out the best words to encourage their peers to take this anonymous tool, 3 steps, 6 words, it's easy to say no to this. Why do you want me to do that? Well, it's easy to say no, but it's how do you help them be able to find the words to explain to their peers, so then their peers gets a chance to be a part of what we grow out of it. So I'm super excited. I think that that's the next step, is getting the young people involved, but also as a leader of this movement and trying to really raise the funds for it and raise awareness about it.
You just said a phrase a little while back, and we haven't said it directly, but this work is really about mental wellness, right? It's about mental health. And I don't know that you started that way, and maybe it's just because now we have social emotional learning as words that we understand in our education systems. I mean, that really seems to be the crux of what you're talking about, and yet there seems to still be a stigma about mental health. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that so we understand that better.
Yeah. So this topic is personal to me in lots of ways, and I'll say the first way it's personal to me is I have a brother who has paranoid schizophrenia. We didn't know about it growing up. He had ear infections. He had tubes in his ears. He had some health issues. He was taking a lot of medicine growing up. He had seizures. And so he grew up, and he ended up getting himself in trouble. He ended up in jail for something kind of small. But then he began to do all these ridiculous behaviors in jail. So he kept getting more time. Like something that should have been 6 months turned into years and years and years. And it was behaviors that was happening in there. But he was in general population. He wasn't tested. No one had tested him. But my brother has a mental health disability. And it wasn't until they got him tested that figured out he had schizophrenia. Then they moved him to the right place, a place at the men's colony in Atascadero. That's the place where folks with mental illness usually get the support. So they only get the medicine they need, but they get the support they need while they do whatever sentence they have. And my brother should have been out of jail way longer before that, but he was never diagnosed. I'm naming that context because so when I found out that it happened with my brother, I was like, okay, well, how do we get him the support he needs, right? And it's hard. It's hard work. It's hard work because he has a mind of his own. He's brilliant. He's smart, but he also has these challenges that come up from time to time, and you never know when they're going to show up, right? And so that's the one way it's personal. And I'll say the second way it's personal is my godson. They just found my godson in Los Angeles. He was unresponsive, and he died. And my godson had bipolar disorder. And he was going through it. He was young. I want to say he probably was in his early 20s, 24, maybe 25. And I think that here's what I know is that a person who cares about my brother so much and watching how the system continues to not be of service to him. I don't have those skills to help my brother with the ways that he needs help. And the system is designed to just kind of like get you out of their office. All these programs and systems, and I don't say all of them, I'm going to name all of them. The ones that my brother has found himself a part of are looking for fast answers, quick answers. And then when those don't work, when the person has a little bit of consciousness, I don't want to medicate myself. I don't want to, then there's no answers. And I think what I know with young people is that growing up, we didn't talk about mental health issues growing up. There was no therapists. I don't even know when I first heard that word. I definitely wasn't a teenager. Didn't even know what that meant. There were students who were in a certain set of classes that had classes, but no one talked to us about what was happening in that class. Most times people got made fun of because of certain exterior behaviors that no one helped educate us on. Oh yeah, be nice. Don't make fun of them, but not contextually like, hey, this is what you should learn about these things. And I think there's just a lack of education around it. And I think that now that we're having more conversation, Mental Health Action Day last week that we participated in was this beautiful concept of like, how do we go from a concept of mental health awareness? Oh, there's this thing called mental health thing, and we should get help around it. Well, how? Well, if your family doesn't believe in it, then where do you get the support? If your family's not going to sign this document that your school needs in order for you to see a counselor at your school, and they won't sign it, so you don't even take it to them, then what do? You just hold on to the stuff by yourself. And maybe you hold on till you get 18 or get to college, and then you can finally get some help. I have met so many young men who bottled stuff up, even with me. And then I find out later, I'm like, man, why didn't you say something? And I think there's a deep fear. If your family won't accept it, so you don't tell them, and then you have this mentor, and then you're like, well, I don't want you to think differently of me, and so therefore I just don't say anything. And it's like, how can you prove to somebody that you won't think differently of them? How can you, if they're worried about changing how you see them, you see the brilliance in them, you see the amazingness in them, I think it becomes really challenging for young people who want the support and yet don't know where to go, because everywhere they go, there's the roadblocks and barriers. And so one of my young men just recently told me that he had been having some of these ideations, and I was like, how long has this been going on? And he said, for 2 years. I'm like, oh man, thank you for sharing this with me. I said, and my heart was like right there with him, like, man. And also my heart was like, what did I not do well enough to earn your trust before? I'm so glad that you're still here. I'm glad you finally came to me. But what did I need to have done better? What did I need to have said better? And those are all my own things that I'm working through. But I told him, I said, listen, I'm here for you. And I'm so glad you shared it with me. Now our job is to do the hard work. Now you've now let it go. You're not carrying it by yourself anymore. Now, how do we begin finding the support? And sometimes that part is even hard. And so I think that with mental health, what we have to do as mentors, as educators, is say, okay, I don't want to make this worse for you, but sometimes things are going to have to get a little bit messier before they can get cleaner.
And so what is, how do we move forward? What is the next opportunity here? I mean, I'm thinking about what you've just been talking about. It's very deep, and it's the crux of so much that is that we're seeing go south in our schools, in our society today. So what is the opportunity here? I mean, something like the Million Masks movement, yeah, it sounds nice, Million Masks movement, right? It's a great catchphrase. It means a lot, but I think it also could be phenomenal if we really had that kind of understanding. And here in public education, at least in the US, we have such an opportunity to start something like that, to make it happen. Why isn't this the first thing that happens when you walk in the door of that school, as opposed to what happens when you're about to get kicked out?
Yeah, thank you for that. What we have to do with schools and education is we have to have quality professional development. Now, as a teacher for 10 years, as an administrator for 3, I can name to you maybe 5 professional developments I remember in those 10 years of teaching, and 3 of them because how bad they were. What industry looks like it did 100 years ago, and yet we would be shocked that it doesn't work? School 100 years ago, rows of desks, the board in the front. Maybe there's a whiteboard now, not chalk anymore. Maybe there's a whiteboard and the electronic board. But it's just saying, I'm going to tell you some information. And 2 weeks later, you tell it back to me. I'm going to grade you based on how well you repeated it back to me. And then we're going to do the cycle all over again. Right? Like the similar cycle over and over again. Maybe you got a table instead of desk, like all these ways of like small little changes of how we have to transform our schools. I believe that professional development is going to be a key one. And I think helping educators recognize that you're teaching more than a subject. Like I went in to be a math teacher. I was not there to start a club for young men who were failing math. I was there to teach math. And most teachers I heard with that concept, hey, I taught it. They didn't do the work. That's on them. And I was like, huh? I don't hold that context. I don't believe in that theory process. The one time I told students, hey, if you don't want to do no work, go sit in the back and I'll teach the ones in the front who want to teach. I said it once. I said it. And after I said it, I'm like, and you better be back there doing work. Because in my mind, that's not a realistic solution. You mean you're going to let he's not wanting to do work. You're going to just give him more permission not to do work? No, not in this class. In this class, I may move you to the front. I may have you walk around with me the whole day, like so I can be on like witnessing what you're like all these ways of like how I saw schools. And I think that schools need more of that. I think the Million Mask movement, it is an opportunity for schools, like you said, at the beginning of school to say, here is what is happening in this building. Of these 1,000 students, 500 students, this is what students are saying is happening that we can't see. Now we can begin over this school year to say, look, you know what, we got 24% of our students talking about sadness and fear. We got 30% of kids saying anxiety and stress. What can we be doing weekly on posters around the school, on announcements in the mornings, on Friday day fun days? We're going to talk about stress management. We're going to learn how to be not just students of academics. We're going to learn how to be students of human development and self-worth. Because if we don't add those things into school, we're going to continue doing what we do. And continue seeing the students who are going to get their education, going to get their education. I had plenty of kids when I was a teacher who they didn't need me. Now, there's other students. I can deliver the homework to their house in a manila folder with a pencil. And they're not doing no work. So imagine in the same room, same school, same class, I have a student who will make up their own homework and the teachers didn't give them any, and one that no matter if it's delivered to them in their room, in the quiet of the evening, they're not going to do it. If you're a teacher needing to teach that range of work, good luck that you're only going to teach math. You have to teach the understanding that this world matters more. You matter more than the grade on your paper, but that you can do it if you work hard. And that's the work that I learned as an educator. So I think it starts with professional development, and too many schools don't do professional development. Teachers have to go to a professional development meeting because it's in their contract, but does it have to be quality? And most teachers are in the back of the room grading papers, and some are in the back folding their arms like, what the heck is this about? And I've seen it all. And I'm clear that if we don't improve that part of our schools, we're going to continue to think that it's going to get better just because we're hiring poor or we didn't give out any prizes during some holiday. I think we have to help teachers become better in that way. So that's my thought.
I love that. I'm going to envision for you the first day of school where all the students come in and the first thing they do is they do a take off the mask project. Boom. In the school. Boom. That's the assembly.
Boom. That's right.
Maybe the teachers have done it in their PD, in their professional development before school started that year. And by the way, that's how we get to 1 million masks. And that's how we get into, as you said, this education system that actually shows us what it means to be human and how we can do that and how we can create that. Ashanti, is there anything else you want to offer or tell us or express before we end this podcast today?
Yeah, I'll just say two things. The mask movement is available to anyone around the world. You can make a mask at millionmask.org, millionmask.org, and it's anonymous. So we invite you to make a mask. We invite you to share it with someone. This summer, we're building out a new model so that teachers can use it and have some immediate data that pulls back to them right away. So that when you make those masks with your students, like you're going to get the data right in the minute. Like you'll be like, wow, here's what's happening. So that's happening. And the second thing I'll say to people is there's a quote we use in our work that says this. It says, the longest distance that most people travel is the 18 inches between their head and their heart. And our work is not trying to fill people's head with more information. It is to say, can you take the journey from your head to your heart? And can you realize that there is so much more to you than anybody can see by looking at you? If you've ever been judged before, just know they're not really judging you. If you've ever judged someone else before, just know you have no idea what you're talking about. And we get a chance to then begin asking more questions. Hey, what's on your mind? Hey, what are you feeling? Hey, can you tell me why you did that? Like, what made you do that? And we can begin learning more about each other, because I think our world has become a lot of pointing fingers and a lot less love. And I think we need a lot more love in the world. So that's my invitation to folks. Make a mask, love yourself, love each other, and take care of each other. That's it.
Thank you, Ashanti. Here's to a lot more love.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the show this week. This has been Lisa Petrides with Educating to be Human. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can access our show notes for links and information on our guests. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Edu2Be-Human. That is EDU to be human. This podcast was created by Lisa Petrides and produced by Eleni Theros. Educating to be Human is recorded by Nathan Sherman and edited by Ty Mayer.